Hey, I'm Srini, the host and founder of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you about how I use Mem to take notes on podcasts. You've probably had the experience of listening to something on a podcast and wanting to remember what it was. Then a week later, you can't remember where you heard it, what podcast it was on, or who said it. And in this video, I'm going to show you how you can use Mem to avoid that in the future. Because you can use tags and bidirectional links inside of Mem, it ends up being a really great tool for taking notes on podcasts and remembering what you learn from the podcasts that you listen to. So I have 3 basic steps that I use for taking notes on podcasts. The first is to take notes on the books I've read if the podcast guest that I happen to be interviewing or listening to as an author. And I make sure to tag each of their notes from their book with their name. So that way it's easy to find when I want to compile everything I've learned from one particular guest. So the first thing we'll do here is we'll actually link the notes from a guest whose information I have here. So I'm just going to actually use her name as the tag. And what you'll see is that anything that has her name tagged will actually show up here. So you'll see here that I have a transcript of an interview, the notes from her book, as well as my own insights from the interview. So the second step in this is to actually create a new mem for the interview itself. And this is something that you can do from your timeline. You'll see here that if the interview is on your calendar, then you can create a new mem for it. Now, keep in mind, that is actually a step that you can skip if you don't host a podcast, but I find it useful so that I can combine my personal takeaways from each interview with the notes from their book, as well as the things that I learned from the transcript. Now, the third step is to get a transcript of the episode inside of Mem. Now, keep in mind that some shows actually make their transcripts available and others don't. But if they don't, there are a lot of different tools that you can use to transcribe the episode. And you'll see here that if I pull up transcripts, it'll give me everything that's tagged as a transcript, and I have an entire transcript here. Now, the important thing to remember about transcripts is that the raw material inside a transcript by itself isn't going to be that useful for creating future knowledge, because as I talked about in the video on how to take smart notes, the thing that makes your notes inside of your Mem database valuable is that you rewrite them in your own words. So you could take a highlight from one of the transcripts inside a episode and then rewrite that section of the transcript in your own words. And that way it becomes far more useful if you wanted to use it to create new content later on. The other thing worth noting here is how I use tags inside of Mem. So anything that's related to the Unmistakable Creative Podcast gets the tag Unmistakable Creative Podcast. And if it's an interview, I tag it as an interview. If it's a transcript, I tag it as a transcript. And I also make it a point to tag each one of these notes with the name of that person. And that way, when I want to basically start to use their notes for creating new content, I've got a comprehensive overview of every single thing that I've learned from each one of my podcast guests. Now, one other way that you can do this is by using the text message feature inside of Mem, which you can set up right here if you go to text. So if you're out and about and you're not in front of your computer, but you hear something that you want to remember, when you configure your text messages inside of Mem here, you can actually then just send yourself a text message and it will go directly into your inbox in Mem. And finally, there's an app that I use called Air, which allows you to just capture highlights while you're listening on the go. And if you have AirPods, you can just triple click and it will actually save the highlight. And then you can actually send that to your inbox as a text as well inside of Mem. I'm guessing probably pretty soon there will be an actual integration that allows you to directly import your podcast highlights. But for now, that's a pretty good workaround. So if you have any questions about how to take podcast notes inside of Mem, feel free to shoot me a message.